Sandy White was, for a brief period in the early 80s, the rock star coder of the ZX Spectrum era, often cited as the man who set 3D in motion, at least in the mainstream. For that achievement he was rightly lauded, but his origins did not stem from game design, they stemmed instead from architecture. Sandy began studying architecture at college, and paired with his fascination for computers and coding, he began to incorporate mechanical elements into the structures he was presenting, using an MK14 as the limited brains of the operation. It's safe to say that when it came to architecture, he was consistently thinking about what he could do with the art form, as opposed to reproducing the art form itself. And perhaps that's where the origins of Ant Attack, his first game, began, starting off initially not as a game but as virtual architecture, where Sandy admits in Popular Computing Weekly that the initial catalyst behind the game was his own curiosity on whether or not he could produce a three-dimensional representation using algorithms. Initially trying things out using a borrowed atom, which, thankfully for Spectrum users, had to be handed back before he'd finished, he settled on the ZX Spectrum and began to learn Z80 machine code. It turned out, he stated in 1983, that the Z80 was much better suited for my particular needs. Once I got used to it, the Z80 was quite an enlightenment. With his architectural algorithms in place, Sandy put his head toward converting the concept into a game, finally settling on 3D Ant Attack. And what better place to start than taking a look at that?
Oh, is that what you want?
Yup.
Because that's how you get ants.
Shit. Okay, so the controls certainly take a bit of getting used to, but that's to be expected. You don't invent an omelette without cracking a few eggs, and you don't invent a 3D game without breaking a few fingers. The concept of Ant Attack is simple. Get in, rescue your partner, don't get eaten to death by massive ants, get out, get home in time for breakfast. Or, well, just before the time runs out will suffice. To do this, you have to navigate your way around Ant Escher, a clever but also fairly on-the-nose reference to ants and MC Escher, who, I might add, had the most fabulous eyebrows any human being has ever possessed. But I digress. The controls here are wacky, to say the least, combining as it does a huge list of controls that take a fair bit of practice to really lodge into your muscle memory. First up, moving your little hero is relatively simple while also being a little too fluid. Shift to rotate clockwise, M to rotate anti-clockwise, and V to move forward. When you get to grips with this swervy mechanic, it feels fluid and fast on its feet, but it can also lead you spinning around in completely the wrong direction, not helped by a few things. One, it can sometimes be difficult to tell which way your protagonist is facing when you're in a rush. Two, if you're being attacked by ants at that time, the sheer panic and the consistent nature of said attacks do not help in the slightest when you're trying to regain composure. And three, if you accidentally run underneath something, well, good luck, you live there now. Running underneath something particularly big can mean that you've got to fumble around blind for a while, but going behind things doesn't mean you have to play guesswork. There are buttons assigned to 4 different viewing angles: 0, P, Enter, and Space. If these keys seem weirdly spaced out, then yes, these keys are weirdly spaced out. Get used to that, you'll need to. Remembering which button will rotate the camera to where you need it to be while an ant is gunning for your groin is essential, all things told. You're not completely defenseless, mind. You do have the ability to climb 1 block higher than an ant in order to confuse them. I've never understood why this works, and I don't think I ever will. Ants are fairly notorious for being able to climb stuff, right? Are they all wearing slippers or something? Why on earth does standing on a box stop the ants from getting to you? Anyway, it's useful that these ants are scared of heights, because as well as being able to jump, you're also able to throw a limited supply of grenades, handily mapped out across 4 different button presses. Come on, Sandy, I've only got so many fingers, lad. 4 buttons for 4 different distances, ranging from short to long, obviously. I'm not sure I can be any more specific than that. You can figure that out. Getting used to these 4 distances is vital, and there is some incredible satisfaction to be had when you're legging it away from a big pile of dirty sugar munchers, turn on the spot, chuck a grenade at just the right distance, and blow the lot of them back to the filthy anthill they came from. As daft as it sounds, there's a certain level of satisfaction to be gained from finally nailing this complex set of controls and actually doing something correctly first time. But mostly you'll end up doing this. And that's fine, because there's definitely a learning curve to Ant Attack, even if the concept and premise themselves are incredibly simple. The overall takeaway here is that regardless of its age or its insistence on using every key the Spectrum had to offer, it is fun. It's fun to stand on top of a box and throw grenades and hope to God you actually hit anything at all. It's fun to run too fast and watch the person you're trying to rescue stand in the middle of a horde of ants like the incredibly short-sighted, forgetful idiot they are. Everything about Ant Attack's monochromatic premise works to spark the imagination, to tell stories that are simple, stupid action romps. More so, in 1983, it was unbelievably impressive, and saw Sandy push for a patent on his soft-solid 3D mechanics, something that he hoped would be used for many other games, and appears to have only been used for his own games later down the line, but we'll get to those. Couple this impressive tech with the game design that Sandy eventually stumbled on, that of survival. Edge magazine more recently described the game as the first survival horror, and that is likely as close a descriptor as you're ever going to get. Unless you're going to be a pedant about it and say there was a game that did survival horror before Ant Attack, in which case, don't complain to me, go to Edge. I'm just the delivery boy. Anyway, boundary pushing is certainly the term that comes to mind when it comes to Sandy's first entry. And it wasn't only progressive in what it offered in the gameplay. Ant Attack was also one of the first games that let you pick your penis parts. You could either have a full penis or no penis, and whichever you picked, you'd then have to rescue someone with the opposite penis parts. It might sound pretty quaint now, but back then, having a female protagonist as the lead, even optionally, was just something most developers wouldn't even consider. And take a moment to explore Sandy White's hilariously old-school website that is now, sadly, no longer updated, but still very much available to look at, and you'll find a visitors forum. Ant Attack was my favourite Specky game when I was 8 years old. I could play as me, a girl. Yay! Just been playing again today. Can't for the life of me remember how to rescue a person. It'll come back to me, although it has been 30 years. Sarah, Birmingham. And that decision for inclusion may seem simple, but even if it led to one single person to become a fan of gaming due to having that choice, then it did what it needed to, and it's another notch in Sandy's innovation bedpost. Speaking of girls, Sandy wasn't alone in his endeavour, working with a real human girl, Angela Sutherland, who had also studied architecture. Referred to in this interview as Sandy's friend, but follow the evidence and you shall find that perhaps Sandy and Angela were a bit more than friends. Unless this is pure coincidence. I mean, White is a fairly common surname, and I would love to look into that further. However, both Angela White and Sandy White are, coincidentally, 2 different porn stars. So searching for either of those independently or in conjunction with each other leads to nothing but absolute filth. Anyway, I'll be back in 2 minutes. Sandy did his own market research to work out who to send the game to, and that market research involved popping down to W.H. Smith's and checking the publishing labels on the cassettes. I may be being facetious there, he may have also gone into Woolworths, but basically he came to the following conclusion. Sinclair Research itself was the company to go with. He didn't want to send the game itself, however, which was probably a wise move. Publishers and developers were pretty quick to carbon copy a game and pass it off as something different. He instead decided to record some footage of the game to VHS and send it off to Sinclair Research. That's That's right. After several months of silence, it was then discovered that Sinclair did not own a VHS player. Not a single one. And apparently no one who worked there owned one or cared enough to bother about taking the tape home, at the very least, in order to check it out. So that put an end to that business. Second attempt, Sandy sent his tape off to Quicksilver, and quick as a flash, they flew Sandy and Angela out from stormy Scotland to sunny Southampton, striking up a deal to publish Ant Attack and probably taking at least 5 minutes to stop and laugh at Sinclair Research for their absolute ineptitude. We received the tape and thought, so what's new? We took it to a friend who had a video recorder and played it. We were amazed. The technique was obviously something new. Straight from the off, Ant Attack was blowing minds, and even if the game had been absolute bobbins, the tech behind the game would likely have been enough to land Sandy a comfy position developing something else. Thankfully though, Ant Attack wasn't bobbins, it was the opposite of bobbins, and reviews for the time were quick to reflect that. Or at least, they were initially. In what now appears to be a standard for Crash Magazine, their review on release, all the way back in issue 1, was truly glowing, even if they did have issues with the control scheme. Some of the best ever 3D graphics for the Spectrum, which work excellently not only on the numerous buildings, but also on the softer forms of the hero, heroine and dreaded ants which swarm through the walled city of Antesha. The object of the game is to jump over the one spot low enough in the outer wall, find your girlfriend, or boyfriend, you can select which, and escape before the ants get you. You can run and jump in 4 directions, throw grenades to kill the ants over varying distances, or stun them by jumping up and down on them. The scene can be viewed from any one of 4 angles. It isn't easy, there are 12 controls required, and it takes a lot of time to get used to them, but the graphics make it all worthwhile. One criticism aimed at the game is that there's more technical virtuosity in the program than gameplay, and it can become repetitive after a while. Nevertheless, an amazing game. No joystick option really possible, very highly recommended. Overall crash rating, 85%. 85%? A very respectable score, but this is Crash Magazine and one review just won't do. So, fast forward to issue 7 and we have a re-review. Ant Attack has remained high in the hotline chart since we started them, proof of the game's popularity with players. There have been many failing attempts over the last several months to get fab 3D effect graphics like Ant Attack. It's still one of the leading 3D games. Playing it now shows that much more colour could have been added. Content and addictive qualities have dropped dramatically. Also, a major point on the graphics is that if 100%, which it received in the original review, is given, then nothing can beat it. I would now rate them at 74%, the reason being that they are unimaginative and uncolourful. Not such a good game itself, but still worth buying just to see the 3D effect. I think this misrepresentation of point scoring is quite a common theme amongst reviewers. 100% does not necessarily mean perfect. There's always room for improvement, but based on the year the game released and the technical marvel that people now had in front of them, 100% seems more than fair. But no, Crash undoes itself again. From an addictive game with great graphics to a mediocre game with unimaginative and uncolourful blocks of crap. Rubbish. Ant Attack is rubbish. Get a grip, Crash Magazine. Anyway, that's not the worst offender though. Crash still had time to don the steel toe caps and really get the boot in. Fast forward all the way up to issue 51 and we have this. 1 day, 1 year, 1 hour, says the introduction. He and she arrived in the walled city of Antesha, the signature of a long-dead race, the city lost from the world of men for days without number. But the ants of Antesha now have your partner, either he or she. Unfortunately, this admirably non-sexist feature is undermined by the programs always calling you a hero, and your job is to rescue him or her with the help of some heavy-duty grenades. Complete one level and the foolish girl or boy goes and gets herself or himself captured again, but this time further away from the starting position. Well, that's life. Back in late 1983, when nobody worried about glaring white backgrounds, UDG-sized graphics and poor sound, 3D Ant Attack was a wonder to behold. But even if you overlook these faults, the fact remains that there isn't much gameplay, and what there is soon grows repetitive. Next to modern software, 3D Ant Attack looks rather dismal. Absolutely absolutely obliterated from 87% to 22% in less than a decade. They were, however, talking out of their arse with this one. And one person's opinion in the future does not necessarily need to align with one person's review in the past. If that was the case, then this channel wouldn't have gotten anywhere. But it's certainly interesting to see just how glaringly different opinions can become. As time moved on, Ant-Attack wasn't completely smeared, however. Ace Magazine added the game to their Hall of Fame and said, "If it all sounds a trifle dated today, well, it is. The plot has been reused 100 times since, but 7 years ago, the isometric 3D and vast playing area caused a considerable stir. Instead of tackling a series of consecutive screens, Ant-Attack presented the player with a world inside their micro," which is far more fair than the grumpy arsehole who was typing for Crash magazine in their late stage issues. And it brings up a very good point. Ant-Attack did create a world in which players could get lost, tell tales of heroism and daring do, in a landscape full of games that were desperately trying to piggyback off the success of arcade favourites. Ant-Attack was a breath of fresh air, and imaginations were running wild. Here's a reader's letter from Popular Computing Weekly in 1984. In the game 3D Ant-Attack, there is an opening on the side of the L-shaped amphitheatre to the right of the city's entrance, which seems impossible to get into. There are 3 openings in the structure, 2 of which are linked by a tunnel. However, there is a way of entering the 3rd hole. After rescuing your partner, you must then stand on top of him or her directly beneath the opening and constantly jump towards it. After a while, an ant will come along and bite your partner, who will in turn jump, giving you an added boost, which is enough to enable you to enter the hole. Once inside, you enter a room which is totally enclosed and it seems to have no purpose. It would be impossible to rescue your partner from the room, as you need to stand on him or her to get in. Perhaps someone could write in and tell me what purpose the room serves. I can't believe it's a bug in an otherwise superb program. No, mate, it's blatantly a bug. What kind of insane person would go to these lengths just to explore a dank hole you can't climb out of? Well, many insane people, it would seem. There were rumours of hidden rooms, lost cities on the outskirts of Antesha. People fell in love with not just the game, but the world it was set in. Which isn't bad for a game in which ants can't even climb. Is it still worth playing today? Abso-bloody-lutely. Is it awkward to control? Yes, but with practice and patience comes a game that is simple to get into and still impressive to behold when you consider the infinitesimally small amount of memory it was crammed into. That does beg the question though, how do you follow up a game like Ant-Attack? A game so innovative and charming and completely out of left field, how can you possibly move on from there? Well, you just sort of don't. It's time for Sandy and Angela to combine their forces together like an Aldi version of the Power Rangers and become Spaceman. I think it's fair to state that Zombie Zombie is merely an iteration of Ant-Attack, but that doesn't stop there from being some pretty big differences between the two. That being said, judging a book by its blocky innards for a moment, side by side the comparison is notable. This was Sandy White's difficult second album, and with an engine already built and ready to use, why not try and put a spin on the formula? Zombie Zombie is, in fact, a pretty big step up from Ant-Attack, with the most noticeable differences being deformable terrain and a vehicle you can fly around in. Instead of avoiding ants and rescuing damsels or men in distress, however, you were tasked with simply killing zombies. And the way in which you do this is not quite as clear as it could be. After fiddling around with this for about half an hour, I'm left with lingering feelings of bewilderment. Zombie Zombie is definitely for those who relish enigmas. The sleeve offers little help, simply one of Quicksilver's crazed blurbs, which I must admit I always enjoy reading. The game itself looks great on first impression, but you have to pick up tips on playing from the demonstration mode. This much do I know. You are in a ruined city with a little red helicopter at your disposal. The ruins are beautifully realised in what Quicksilver terms soft solid graphics. You can climb into the chopper and fly around, in which case the ruins can be rearranged by picking up and dropping individual blocks. In the helicopter you are safe, but if you choose to go foot slogging, along come the zombies. Nasty little green figures. These do something of an unspeakable nature to you if they get close, but you can temporarily blow them away. But here's the puzzle. What really is the object of the game? In the demonstration, it seems as though you have to construct ramps up which to lure the zombies so that they can fall to a precipitous death. But to me this seems a rather clumsy tactic in what is otherwise a very elegant game. I suppose I'll have to accept it though. The game failed to hook me as I just couldn't believe in it. Big K did not rate the game particularly well, but as they used a rating system in which a good game would get the initials KKK next to it, that's probably in Zombie's favour. They were right though, the game is initially baffling. The card inlay does not help in the slightest. We're provided with a story, instructions on how to load, and then a few controls. Move and fire together to blow away zombies. If you're thinking, oh, blow away like with a shotgun, then no, you're wrong. It means literally blow the zombies away. If your own breath is enough to turn a walking decayed corpse around, then you seriously need to get yourself to a dentist. Stand still and fire to change view angle. That's it for walking around. In the copter you get to take off or lift brick, press fire. To land or drop brick, release fire. And that's it. To get a bit more detail on what the actual purpose of the game is, you need to watch the in-game demo, which acts as a sort of tutorial, but also doesn't really teach you how things are fully working unless you've got a keen eye. So here's the deal, let me save you the hassle. You need to get a zombie to follow you so that you can lead it up a stairway. Once you're high up, jump off and the zombie will follow you and turn itself into a puddle of mush on the floor. In order to get a zombie to follow you, and this is the real crux of the issue here, you have to walk into them while they're not looking at you. And that is a lot easier said than done for a variety of reasons. The viewing angle makes things slightly awkward, there can be multiple zombies on screen at once, the graphics make it so that knowing where a zombie is actually looking isn't immediately clear, but it is doable. The problem is, if you get it wrong, you've practically no chance of recovering. These boys certainly get lively when they lay their eyes on you, and your ability to gently blow at them isn't exactly the life-saving mechanic it sounds like on paper. There are, however, massive improvements at play here, specifically where the controls are concerned, but even that comes with caveats that show Dear Sandy was trying to cram as much as he could into a very tiny space. Where Ant Attack gave you 456 different controls spread across the keyboard in random assortments, Zombie instead crams 200 controls into a joystick. Hyperbole, obviously, but also no, literally. Take moving around, for instance. If you stand still and press fire, you change the viewing angle in increments of 90 degrees. That's great, that is. Really good. No, I know I sound like I'm being sarcastic, but my voice is just permanently like this. It is genuinely a lot better to handle than 4 different buttons spread across a keyboard. The problem is, if you're pushing in a direction and you press fire, that makes you blow a lung fart out of your mouth. And if you're stood inside the helicopter and you hold down fire, that makes it fly, but you have to hold it down in order to keep flying. So how do you drop blocks? Well, you release fire, but not too much, because if you do that then you'll land. So you have to quickly let go of fire and then quickly press it again in order to drop a block. Oh, and did you want to turn the camera around? Yeah, you're going to have to slowly exit the vehicle with your hands in the air, sir. Sorry, flashback. But yes, you get where I'm coming from. Simplifying the controls while also expanding what you can do in the game has its drawbacks. Crash Magazine floated a score of 80% towards Zombie, at least. They did initially. They probably reduced that to an image of a turd floating in a river a couple of years later, but I digress. On release, it seems that Sandy White's second release was positively received. Sort of. I mean, not everywhere. In what is one of the strangest reviews I've read on any game, here we have Home Computing Weekly's review. The first thing I do when reviewing any game is to read the inlay card. Hopefully this will give an insight into the game, and perhaps give me a feel for it. Having chosen the keyboard as my method of control, I found myself as a figure near a helicopter. The movement of the figure on screen didn't quite match the up, down, left, right messages from the keyboard. Eventually I managed to get into the helicopter and fly off over the landscape. Every now and then I glimpsed something among the buildings. ruins. When I landed, an indeterminate figure approached me. Sometimes I won the battle, sometimes I lost. All the movable graphics are small and were jerky in their movements. After seeing many games with superb graphics animation, I got the impression that this was a small child's version. Now correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not wrong. This guy was phoning it in so hard he ended up having his landline cut off for failure to pay. This is the equivalent of someone reading the blurb on the back of a book and then writing a book review. Just to reiterate that last patronising point once more, after seeing many games with superb graphics animation, I got the impression that this was a small child's version. What the hell does that even mean? Also, what sort of self-respecting magazine wraps up reviews with percentages and then sums it up with stars? Rubbish. Absolute rubbish. Anyway, I'm on a tangent, let's roll back. Popular Computing Weekly were a bit more on the ball. Apart from the city, as enigmatically deserted and mysterious as ever Antesha was, you have a helicopter to take you over long distances safely, a blaster to deter zombies, and a choice of gender. You also get the chance to design your own city and save it to tape, a lot of fun to try out on your friends. But what you ask is the objective of the game. Well, it took me quite a while to figure out, as there isn't anyone to rescue and the instructions aren't telling. However, I'm prepared to give you a hint. The music played is 10 green bottles, and the zombies are green as well. Well then, brilliant, Holmes. So it bloody does. 10 green zombies standing on a wall. Yeah, I mean, it's not a great hint, but at least there was something, I suppose. So that leads me to summarise then, and having read through all the reviews at the time of this game's release, I'm inclined to agree with a lot of them, while also being a little baffled as to the game's relative obscurity in comparison to Sandy's previous game. Zombie improves a lot about the original's formula, while also ruining some of the things that worked about it. The new zombie theme doesn't quite flow as well as Ant Attack's fast-paced jogging simulator, but the improved controls are an absolute delight. The simplicity of Ant Attack's objectives far outweigh Zombie's weird corpse-luring suicide pact mechanic, but I can't write my name using a helicopter in Ant Attack. What I'm getting at is, while it's not perfect, it's a worthy addition to Sandy's legacy, and it's a shame it's not often looked back on as fondly as the original was. On the face of it, it may seem like it does nothing particularly new in comparison to the game that won everyone's hearts, but clearly there was an effort made to expand on the formula and really try to hammer out some of the criticisms that Ant Attack received. Also, there's nowhere else for me to inject this, so let me introduce interlude time. David John Rowe was responsible for the absolutely incredible, iconic artwork that adorns Ant Attack's front cover, and he's also responsible for the artwork that adorns Zombie, which takes a completely different approach and may not be as iconic, but the subtlety of the helicopter's shadow over this grotesque zombie is just wonderfully done. David Rowe produced a lot of fantastic artwork, and he still does. I'll link to his website in the comments, but I just wanted to get that out there because people like this don't often get the shout out that's required for the work they do. So, there you go. Oh, yeah, he also did the artwork for Nightmare, and that is as good a segue as you're gonna get, because this next game used to give me actual nightmares.
There's no earthly way of knowing which direction we are going.
Eye of the Mask is, if nothing else, vivid. It is Sandy White at his most self-indulgent and surrealist best, and while it's not a particularly fantastic game, i.e. I have no idea what I'm doing even after 30 years, none of his games stand out to me as much as this one does. And that's mostly due to the nightmares, a really big pile of nightmares. And that's largely due to the graphics, which at the time were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And this big face, which I could have sworn said something, but now I fear I've literally overlapped a nightmare with real life because clearly it did not do that, so that's weird. Anyway, the objective of the game is to run around with no idea what to do, come across some crystals and shoot at them, and then be told that you didn't do it right. That's always been my experience with it at least, but let's have a look at these reviews. There is actually a purpose purpose behind the game after all. The idea of the game is to create a robot, various bits of which are hidden in universes deep within a maze. The robot has to be built in a specific order, starting with the feet and finishing with the mask. The mask is divided into 32 different universes, which are all color-coded. At the entrance to each universe is a chamber containing 3 crystals, one of which contains a part of the robot. Right. Fair enough, this definitely doesn't sound like someone trying to get you to join a weird cult, but whatever. Apparently there are objectives, but much like the games that came before it, the playability comes second to the technical wizardry at play on screen. Once again, this is running on a 48K Spectrum, and once again, Sandy White was flexing the architectural coding muscle when it came to throwing all of this stuff up on screen. Put it this way, if Sandy was one of the 80s coding rock stars and Ant Attack was his big hit and Zombie Zombie was his difficult second album, well, Eye of the Mask was the weird concept album no one quite knew how to process. Popular Computing Weekly put it best: Sandy White was much acclaimed for his Quicksilver titles Ant Attack and Zombie Zombie. Since then, he seems to have been a bit quiet. Now, however, we have Eye of the Mask released from Electric Dreams. The first thing that hits you when you load the game up is the earth-shattering 3D display and the mind-bending perspective scrolling. This is possibly some of the most obviously impressive graphics programming I've seen on the Spectrum. However, as you start playing it, things become very confused. Avid mappers and strategists may well enjoy this one, but I found looking at the graphics more fun. As the man in the funny raincoat said, "Very clever, Sandy. Now give us a game. Only time will prove him right or wrong." Sinclair user were equally as perplexed. Although there's obviously much strategy and skill involved in the game, it does become a little repetitive. Luckily, the power of the graphics save it from becoming totally boring, but we should have preferred to see rather more variety all the same. Crash Magazine, however, never wants to outdo themselves, with insane scores plucked from the ether, landed the game a whacking great 92% on release in 1985. And I would have loved the person who re-reviewed Ant Attack to go back and look at the score and absolutely fill his pants with bile, because Eye of the Mask is, without doubt, not as good as Ant Attack or Zombie Zombie that came before it. Is it impressive? Yes, it's incredibly impressive. It's mesmerizing in what it manages to achieve, looking not dissimilar to a monochromatic Super FX game, with similar, if not better, frame rates to boot. But as far as the game was concerned, there's not a great deal to it. When it's not being confusing or difficult to control, it's merely a 3D maze with a terrifying nightmare face attached to it. And that, ladies and gents, was the end of Sandy White's software career. 3 games might not seem like a lot, and there are multiple issues across the board with all of them, especially when looking back through the lens of the year 2021. But let's just calm down and not do a Crash Magazine and take a massive dump on everything. From Ant Attack to Zombie Zombie to Eye of the Mask, Sandy's approach to game design feels like outsider art. In summary, an architect with a penchant for mechanized sculptures produces one of the first 3D worlds that we as gamers can sit down and explore. He then goes on to iterate on that idea by giving us the tools to mold our own world within the sandbox arena. He then jettisons that whole concept and gives me nightmares as a child using only a simple maze and a big creepy face. What stands out for me is one of Sandy's first interviews back when he first became that Spectrum rock star in Computer and Video Games magazine. Though Sandy has agreed to do another game for Quicksilver, he is concerned that business pressures might, at some stage in the future, threaten his artistic integrity. And I don't think they ever did, truthfully. Sandy never managed to get a true handle on developing that perfect game, and there are many reasons why that could be the case, but one thing you could never level at the guy is that he made anything uninteresting. With 3 games under his belt during the course of the 80s, each and every one of them has left an impression on someone, somewhere. Whether it's a girl who got to play as her own sex, Bill Harbison, Ocean's artist extraordinaire, absolutely enamoured by the concepts of Zombie Zombie.
And with his next game, he basically invented Minecraft with Zombie Zombie. So you've got a little helicopter and you can go around and you can build little castles and structures out of blocks. Because with that one, you had to like go up to a zombie and it would follow you, and you had to make it fall off a cliff and die. So you had to get your helicopter and build like some steps going up to a wall and then a drop off, and just enough for you to jump to the next wall, and then the zombie would fall down and die. But the fact that you could build stuff in 3D and run around it, that was much more interesting to me. The guy was a genius.
Or just me, terrified by Eye of the Mask? There was a passion behind every project, and while the career may have been short, it left a mark to this day. From a Eurogamer interview in 2013. I feel lucky to have done something in my life which has been remembered for 3 decades. And he's damn right to feel that way. Sandy's impact on those who experienced his outside take on gaming is something that can be taken completely to heart. He consistently pushed the boundaries of not just the spectrum, but of what games could do and what they could be. And he might have only consistently done that for like 2 or 3 years, but he still consistently did it. Ant Attack was nominated for the 1983 Golden Joystick Award under Best Original Game of the Year, but apparently came second to Diddums, which pretty much sums up everything that's wrong with the entire world. But I don't want to finish on a bad note, I want to finish on a good note. So, let me finish with a quote from Retro Gamer's interview with the man himself recently. Eye of the Mask was your last published game. What have you been up to since then? I think we'll have to settle for the condensed highlights. After Telecomsoft, for whom I was writing an Amiga game called Dick's Special, crashed and burned, I escaped from the games industry and built a giant colour printer from scratch. It used compressed air and acrylic paint controlled by a Commodore Amiga to print full-size billboards. I sold a few before Canon and the like invented inkjets that were a fraction of the size and 1 billion times better. In need of cash, the Ant Attack millions spent, I became the first employee of Bristol-based SN Systems, who still make the world's entire output of cross-platform game dev kits. I wrote the DSP code for the first CD emulator. I later escaped from Britain and lived in Greece for a couple of years, where I wrote a ragdoll physics engine long before anyone else was doing it in 1995, but had trouble selling it to anyone for reasons that would need an article themselves. I then wrote server-side Java for online insurance and a software aid for designing windmills. Did I mention the singing charity daffodil? Or the video wall quiz? Or the artificially intelligent sex toy? What better quote to end on from our jovial Scottish genius. No, wait. I want to end on this one where he says his favourite food is Cocoa Pops and chocolate digestives, because he is 100% bang on the money, and this alone proves what a clever bastard he was.